In the sleepy village of St. Mary Mead, a whisper of danger stirs. A reclusive film star hides an ancient Egyptian idol, its eyes guarding a deadly secret. When a young gardener vanishes, Miss Jane Marple uncovers cryptic notes, poisoned flowers, and a trail of greed leading to a moonlit ritual. Who is the shadowy figure stalking Haverford Manor? What cursed treasure lies within the idol? And can Miss Marple unravel a web of betrayal before the full moon claims another victim? Dive into a mystery where every clue is a question, and only Miss Marple can find the truth.
Chapter 1. The Whisper in St. Mary Mead. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over St. Mary Mead, its light filtering through the lace curtains of Mrs. Bantry's tea shop, where the air hummed with the gentle clink of porcelain and the murmur of village gossip. Miss Jane Marple sat in her usual corner, her knitting needles clicking softly, a half-finished scarf pooling in her lap. Her sharp eyes, hidden behind spectacles, darted occasionally to the other patrons, catching snippets of conversation like a fisherman netting minnows. Today the village was abuzz with a new topic. Clara Vane, the enigmatic film star who had recently taken up residence in the crumbling grandeur of Haverford Manor. "She's barely been seen, you know," Mrs. Price said, the butcher's wife, leaning over her teacup toward Mrs. Hartnell, whose hat brim quivered with intrigue. "Locked herself in that old pile, they say, with nothing but her trunks and that odd statue she's so peculiar about." Miss Jane Marple's needles paused, just for a moment. A statue. Her mind, ever attuned to the unusual, filed the detail away. She sipped her tea, the delicate bergamot note lingering, and let the conversation drift toward her. "It's not just any statue," Mrs. Hartnell replied, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Elsie, the maid up at the manor, told me it's some heathen thing from her travels, Egypt or some such place. Keeps it in a locked room, she does. Says it's cursed, brings bad luck to anyone who touches it." Mrs. Price gasped, her hand fluttering to her chest. "Cursed? Well, that explains the gardener, doesn't it? Young Tommy Pierce, gone without a trace after working there last week. His mother's beside herself." Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, but her thoughts were racing. Tommy Pierce, a cheerful lad with a shock of red hair, had been weeding the manor's overgrown beds only days ago. She'd seen him herself, whistling as he worked, his wheelbarrow piled high with clippings. His disappearance had been chalked up to youthful wanderlust by the local constable, but Miss Marple was not so easily convinced. People didn't vanish in St. Mary Mead without reason. She finished her tea, tucked her knitting into her basket, and arose, offering a polite nod to the other women. "I must be off," she said, her voice mild. "The vicar asked me to bring some flowers for the church. Perhaps I'll stop by Haverford Manor on my way. Miss Vane might appreciate a neighborly gesture." Mrs. Hartnell's eyes widened. "You're braver than I, Jane. That place gives me the shivers." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a house like any other." But as she stepped into the warm September air, her mind was already turning over the pieces of this new puzzle. A reclusive film star, a mysterious statue, a missing gardener. It was, she thought, rather like one of those detective novels her nephew Raymond was so fond of. Only in St. Mary Mead, the mysteries were real, and Miss Marple had a knack for unraveling them. Haverford Manor loomed at the edge of the village. Its ironclad walls and chipped gargoyles gave it an air of faded majesty. The iron gates creaked as Miss Marple pushed them open, a basket of freshly cut roses dangling from her arm. The garden was a tangle of neglect, roses climbing wild over broken trellises, and the air carried the heavy scent of damp earth. She knocked on the heavy oak door, her ears catching the faint echo of footsteps within. The door opened to reveal Clara Vane herself, a vision of faded glamour, Her auburn hair was swept into a loose chignon, and her silk dress, though elegant, hung slightly askew as if she dressed in haste. Her green eyes, once famous for their sparkle on the silver screen, were shadowed with unease. "Good afternoon," Miss Marple said brightly. "I'm Jane Marple, from the village. I brought some flowers for the church collection, and I thought you might like a few for the manor. It's such a lovely old place." Clara's smile was tight, almost brittle. "How kind of you, Miss Marple. I'm not much for visitors, but please come in." The hall was dim, its high ceiling festooned with cobwebs, and a heavy door at the far end curved upward into shadow. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to a heavy door at the far end, its brass lock gleaming new against the worn wood. Clara noticed her glance and stiffened. "That's just a storage room. Old props from my films, nothing interesting." Miss Marple nodded, her expression guileless. "Of course. These old houses are full of secrets, aren't they? My own cottage has a cupboard that creaks like a banshee." Clara's laugh was forced, and she led Miss Marple to a sitting room where a tray of tea things sat untouched. They chatted politely about the weather and the village, but Miss Marple noted Clara's distracted air, the way her fingers twisted the hem of her sleeve. When a sudden clatter came from the kitchen, Clara jumped, her teacup rattling in its saucer. "Just the maid," she murmured, but her eyes darted to the locked door again. Miss Marple excused herself to leave the roses in the kitchen, where she found Elsie, a nervous girl with flour-dusted hands, scrubbing a pot with unnecessary vigor. "Oh, Miss Marple," Elsie squeaked, "didn't expect you here." "Just delivering flowers," Miss Marple said, setting the roses on the counter. "It must be exciting, working for someone like Miss Vane. All those stories from her travels." Elsie's eyes darted to the door. "She don't talk much about that. Keeps to herself mostly, except for that statue. She's always fussing over it, locking it away like it's the crown jewels." "Statue?" Miss Marple asked, her tone all innocence. "It's a funny thing, all gold and black, with eyes that seem to follow you. She brought it back from some dig in Egypt years ago. Says it's worth a fortune, but I think it scares her. Tommy thought so too. He said he saw her praying to it one night, like it was a god." Her heart quickened, but she kept her face serene. "How curious! And where is young Tommy now? I haven't seen him about." Elsie's hands stilled. "Nobody knows. He was here one day, gone the next. Left his tools in the shed, even his pay. It's not like him." Miss Marple patted Elsie's arm. "I'm sure he'll turn up. Boys do wander." But as she left the manor, her steps took her not to the church, but to the gardener's shed, a rickety structure half hidden by overgrown nettles. The door was ajar, and inside the air smelled of earth and oil. Tommy's tools lay scattered, a rake tipped against a wheelbarrow. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the dim interior, landing on a scrap of paper tucked beneath a spade. She plucked it free, her fingers brushing against the rough grain of the wood. The note was scrawled in pencil, the handwriting uneven. "The idol sees all. Midnight, under the U. Tell no one." Below it was a crude sketch of a symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, like a lightning bolt. Miss Marple tucked the note in her sleeve, her mind alight with possibilities. The yew tree stood near the manor's gate, its gnarled branches heavy with age. Had Tommy seen something there? Something worth hiding? She glanced back at the manor, where a curtain twitched in an upstairs window. Clara's silhouette stood framed against the glass, watching. Miss Marple smiled to herself, a small, determined smile. The village might see her as a harmless old spinster, but she knew better than to dismiss a whisper. In St. Mary Mead, whispers often led to truth, and this one spoke of secrets darker than she'd expected. As she walked home, the note await in her sleeve, Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the yew tree and the midnight meeting it promised. She would need to be careful. Curiosity, after all, could be a dangerous thing. But danger or not, she was resolved to uncover the truth behind Clara Vane's idol and Tommy Pierce's disappearance. The puzzle was only beginning, and Miss Marple was never one to leave a puzzle unsolved. The chapter closed with her pausing at her garden gate, the evening air cool against her skin. She glanced toward the manor, its silhouette stark against the fading light. Tomorrow she would return to Haverford Manor, perhaps with a basket of apples instead of roses, and she would watch and listen and knit her way closer to the heart of the mystery.
Chapter 2. The Star's Shadow. The morning mist clung to St. Mary Mead like a gossamer veil, softening the edges of the village's stone cottages as Miss Jane Marple made her way along the high street. Her straw hat sat primly atop her silver hair, and her basket swung lightly, filled with a jar of homemade gooseberry jam, a pretext for another visit to Haverford Manor. The cryptic note she'd found in the gardener's shed, with its talk of idols and midnight meetings, had kept her awake half the night, her mind stitching together possibilities as deftly as her knitting needles wove wool. Clara Vane's locked room and her nervous demeanor were threads in a tapestry Miss Marple was determined to unravel. At the manor's gates, she paused, noting the fresh tire tracks in the mud, deep, uneven, as if a vehicle had left in haste. The yew tree loomed nearby, its ancient branches casting dappled shadows. She examined the ground beneath it, her eyes catching a glint of metal, a cigarette case, monogrammed with the initials T.P. Tommy Pierce. She slipped it into her basket, her heart quickening. Had Tommy dropped it during his mysterious midnight errand, or had someone left it as a warning? Inside the manor, Clara was nowhere to be seen, but Elsie, the maid, greeted Miss Marple with a nervous smile. "Oh, Miss Marple, you're back! Miss Vane's in the conservatory, but she's not herself today. Keeps pacing and muttering about that statue." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "I brought some jam for her, a little village welcome. Perhaps I could have a word? It's so lonely in these big houses." Elsie hesitated, then led her through the manor's dim corridors, past faded portraits and chipped vases. The conservatory was a glass-domed haven, thick with the scent of jasmine and damp earth. Clara stood by a trellis of climbing roses, her silk scarf fluttering as she turned, startled. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice strained, "how thoughtful of you to visit again." "I couldn't resist. My aunt always said house feels warmer with a touch of sweetness. You've such a lovely home, though it must be a lot to manage alone." Clara's fingers tightened on her scarf. "I manage. Elsie helps, and I prefer my own company." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to a small table where a leather-bound journal lay open, its pages filled with sketches of an angular statuette, gold and obsidian, with almond-shaped eyes that seemed to stare from the paper. "What a striking drawing," she said innocently. "Is that your statue? Elsie mentioned you brought it from Egypt." Clara snapped the journal shut, her cheeks flushing. "It's just a keepsake, nothing special." But Elsie, hovering nearby, blurted, "It's more than that, miss. You're always fussing over it, locking it in that room, and those men who come at night." She clapped her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. Clara's face hardened. "Elsie, that's enough. Go polish the silver." Elsie scurried off, and Miss Marple seized the moment. Night visitors. My, that sounds intriguing. In my village we once had a poet who entertained all sorts at odd hours. Caused quite a stir. Clara's laugh was brittle. "It's nothing like that. Just delivery men, bringing furniture. The manor needs repairs." Miss Marple smiled, but her mind catalogued the lie. Delivery men didn't visit at midnight, and Clara's unease suggested more than furniture was at stake. She excused herself, promising to return with a recipe for scones,
and made her way to the village square where the annual fete was in full swing. Stalls brimmed with jam jars and knitted shawls, and children darted through the crowd clutching toffee apples. Miss Marple settled on a bench, her eyes scanning for Clara, who had promised to make a rare appearance. The fete was a riot of color and noise, but a sudden scream sliced through the chatter. The crowd parted, revealing Mr. Clements, the manor's groundskeeper, standing by the gate, his face pale. "Blood!" he shouted, pointing to a patch of crushed foxgloves near the manor's entrance. "And look, someone's trampled my prize flowers!" Miss Marple hurried over, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel. The foxgloves were indeed ruined, their vibrant purple petals mashed into the earth. A faint smear of red stained the leaves. Not much, but enough to set her mind racing. She knelt, pretending to adjust her shoe, and noted tiny shards of glass glinting in the dirt. A broken vial, perhaps. She pocketed a shard, careful not to touch the blood. "Such a shame about your flowers," she said to Mr. Clements, who was wringing his cap. "Did you see anyone near here last night?" He shook his head. "Not a soul, but I heard a motorcycle roaring off around midnight. Woke me from my sleep." A motorcycle. The tire tracks at the manor. Miss Marple's thoughts whirled. She spotted Clara across the fete, her auburn hair catching the sun as she chatted with the vicar, but her eyes kept darting to the gate. Was she watching for someone or something? Miss Marple slipped away, heading to the village post office, where gossip flowed as freely as tea at Mrs. Bantry's. Mrs. Weatherby, the postmistress, was sorting letters, her pince-nez perched on her nose. "Miss Marple, what brings you here? Not another mystery, I hope." "Just a bit of curiosity," Miss Marple said, leaning on the counter. "I heard a motorcycle last night, near the manor. Do you know anyone in the village who rides one?" Mrs. Weatherby's eyes gleamed. "That'd be Mr. Grimsby, the antiques dealer. He's got a noisy old thing, always tearing through at odd hours. Came by yesterday asking about parcels for Miss Vane. Said he's doing business with her. Something about rare artifacts." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. An antiques dealer tied to Clara's statue. She thanked Mrs. Weatherby and stepped outside, her mind turning to Elsie's mention of night visitors. Grimsby was a name to pursue, but first she needed to know more about the statue itself. She recalled a conversation with her nephew Raymond, who'd once rambled about ancient Egyptian artifacts during a visit. "Aunt Jane," he said, "those old idols often hide secrets, gems, maps, even curses. Collectors go mad for them." Back at her cottage, Miss Marple rummaged through her bookshelf, pulling out a dusty volume on ancient relics. She flipped to a chapter on Egyptian statuettes, her finger tracing descriptions of gold and obsidian figures, often linked to forgotten cults. One passage caught her eye. Some idols were said to guard treasures, their eyes carved to watch for thieves. Touching them without ritual could bring calamity. Calamity, like a missing gardener or blood on crushed flowers. Miss Marple closed the book, her thoughts returning to the note's symbol, a circle split by a jagged line. It wasn't in the book, but it felt significant, like a key to a lock she hadn't yet found. She glanced at the cigarette case, its monogram glinting in the lamplight. Tommy had been at the yew tree, perhaps meeting someone about the idol. Had he seen too much? As dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting untouched. The fate's bloodied flowers, Clara's evasions, and Grimsby's nocturnal visits wove a pattern she couldn't yet fully see. But patterns, she knew, always emerged with patience. Tomorrow, she would visit Mr. Grimsby's shop in the next town, armed with nothing but her curiosity and a basket of scones. If the idol was the heart of this mystery, Grimsby might hold the next clue. She rose, tucking the cigarette case and glass shard into a drawer. The manor's secrets were beginning to stir, and Miss Marple was determined to bring them into the light. For now, the chapter closed with her gazing at the darkening sky, a faint smile on her lips. The idol's shadow was long, but she had faced shadows before, and she always found their source.
Chapter 3. The Dealer's Gambit. The morning train to Much Benham rattled through the countryside, its rhythm a counterpoint to Miss Jane Marple's thoughts as she sat by the window, her knitting bag nestled beside her. The rolling hills, dappled with September light, did little to distract her from the puzzle of Haverford Manor. The cigarette case with Tommy Pierce's initials, the blooded foxgloves, and Elsie's whispered tales of Clara Vane's statue had woven a thread of suspicion that led straight to Mr. Grimsby, the antiques dealer. His name had surfaced too often to be coincidence, and Miss Marple intended to pay him a visit under the guise of browsing for a gift. Much Benham's High Street was a bustle of market stalls and shoppers, the air sharp with the scent of fresh bread and cool smoke. Grimsby's shop, Curios and Relics, stood at the far end, its window cluttered with tarnished candelabras and chipped porcelain. A bell jangled as Miss Marple entered, her sensible shoes tapping on the worn floorboards. The shop was a labyrinth of shelves, each groaning under the weight of oddities, jade figurines, brass compasses, and a stuffed owl that seemed to glare from its perch. Mr. Grimsby emerged from behind a velvet curtain, a wiry man with slick-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Good morning, madam," he said, adjusting his cufflinks. "Looking for something special?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with practised innocence. "Oh, just a trinket for my nephew. He's fond of history, Egyptian artifacts in particular. I heard you deal in such things." Grimsby's smile tightened, just for a moment. "Egyptian, you say? Rare market, that. Most of what I have is local, Victorian silver, that sort of thing, but I might have something in the back. Let me check." As he disappeared behind the curtain, Miss Marple's gaze roamed the shop, landing on a glass case displaying a collection of amulets. One caught his eye, a small obsidian disc, etched with a circle bisected by a jagged line, the same symbol from Tommy's note. His heart quickened, but he kept his face serene, pretending to admire a chipped teapot, as Grimsby returned. "No luck, I'm afraid. Egyptian pieces are hard to come by. Collectors snatch them up." "Such a pity," Miss Marple replied, her voice light. "I heard Miss Vane up at Haverford Manor has quite a piece. A statuette, they say. Gold and black, very striking." Grimsby's hand twitched, knocking a brass paperweight to the floor. He stooped to retrieve it, his face flushed. "Clara Vane. She's got a few trinkets, yes. I've done business with her. Small things, nothing grand." Miss Marple nodded, as if satisfied, but her mind was racing. Grimsby's unease was palpable, and the symbol in the case tied him to Tommy's note. She thanked him and left, promising to return if her nephew's tastes changed. Outside, she lingered by the shop window, pretending to adjust her hat. Through the glass she saw Grimsby hurrying to the back, his movements furtive. Her next stop was the Much Benham Library, a quiet stone building where she hoped to research the symbol. The librarian, Miss Finch, was a sharp-eyed woman who greeted Miss Marple with a nod. "Back so soon, Miss Marple? More gardening books?" "Not today," Miss Marple said, settling at a reading table. "I'm curious about ancient symbols, perhaps Egyptian. Do you have anything on that?" The librarian returned with a heavy tome, Icons of the Nile, its pages brittle with age. Miss Marple flipped through it, her fingers pausing on a plate depicting a cult of Anubis, the jackal-headed god. There, among the hieroglyphs, was the symbol, a circle split by a jagged line, said to mark sacred relics guarded by cursors. The text warned of calamity to those who disturb the watcher's gaze. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Clara's statue, with its staring eyes, fit the description too well. As she left the library, a commotion drew her attention to the street.
A woman in a navy coat was arguing with Grimsby outside his shop, her voice sharp and clipped. "You promised me the truth, Arthur. You can't keep dodging me." Miss Marple edged closer, feigning interest in a nearby flower stall. The woman's face was angular, her auburn hair streaked with grey, a striking resemblance to Clara Vane. Could this be Lydia, the estranged sister Elsie had mentioned in passing? Miss Marple's memory flicked to a village rumour. Clara and her sister had fallen out years ago over their father's estate. Was the statue part of their feud? Grimsby's voice was low, urgent. "Lydia, not here. It's too dangerous. Meet me tonight at the usual place." Lydia's eyes narrowed. "You better have answers, or I'll go to Clara myself." She stormed off, and Grimsby retreated into his shop, oblivious to Miss Marple's watchful gaze. The pieces were aligning, the symbol, Grimsby's dealings, and now Lydia's involvement. But the puzzle was far from complete. Miss Marple caught the evening train back to St. Mary Mead, her mind buzzing. That night, as she sat by her fire, the telephone rang, a rare occurrence. It was Mrs. Bantry, her voice breathless. "Jane, you won't believe it. Grimsby's shop was broken into an hour ago. The police are there now. Someone scrawled a symbol on the wall, like a lightning bolt in a circle. Sounds like vandalism, but it's queer, isn't it?" Miss Marple's grip on the receiver tightened. "Very queer indeed. Did they take anything?" "Nothing valuable, they say. Just smashed a few cases. Grimsby's in a state, though. Keeps muttering about curses." Miss Marple thanked her and hung up, her thoughts racing. The symbol on the wall matched Tommy's note and the amulet in Grimsby's shop. Someone was sending a message, or a warning. She recalled the book's mention of a ritual tied to the Anubis cult, one that required a sacred relic to be awakened under specific conditions. Was Clara's statue such a relic? And had Tommy stumbled onto its secret? She rose, fetching the cigarette case and glass shard from her drawer. The shard, she realized, had a faint residue, oily with a bitter scent. Not blood, perhaps, but something else. Poison? She wrapped it carefully in a handkerchief, resolving to show it to Dr. Haydock, who had a knack for chemistry. For now she needed to know more about Lydia and her connection to the statue. As the village clock chimed midnight, Miss Marple sat at her writing desk, sketching the symbol from memory. Its jagged lines seemed to pulse with intent, a marker of something ancient and dangerous. Grimsby's rattled demeanour, Lydia's anger, and the break-in pointed to a web of greed and fear, with the statue at its centre. Tomorrow she would invite Lydia for tea, using her old friend Mrs. Bantry as a betweener. A sister's secrets, she knew, could unravel even the tightest knots. The chapter closed with Miss Marple extinguishing her lamp, the darkness settling around her cottage. The idle shadow was growing, its reach touching Grimsby, Lydia, and perhaps Tommy's fate. But Miss Marple was not one to shrink from shadows. She would follow this thread, however perilous, until the truth lay bare.
Chapter 4. A Sister's Secret. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cottage, casting delicate patterns on the polished oak table, where a teapot steamed beside a plate of homemade shortbread. Miss Marple adjusted her spectacles, her knitting needles resting in her lap, as she prepared to receive an unexpected guest, Lydia Vane, Clara's estranged sister. The events at Much Benham, Grimsby's rattled demeanor, the symbol-scrawled break-in, and Lydia's heated argument had tightened the threads of the mystery surrounding Haverford Manor's idol. Miss Marple had enlisted Mrs. Bantry to extend the invitation, framing it as a neighborly gesture to welcome a newcomer to the village's orbit. Lydia had agreed, albeit reluctantly, and now Miss Marple waited, her mind sharp as ever.
The knock came promptly at 3, and Lydia Vane entered, her navy coat draped over one arm, her auburn hair pulled tightly back to reveal a face both striking and worn. Her resemblance to Clara was uncanny, but where Clara's eyes held a nervous flicker, Lydia's burned with a guarded intensity. She carried herself like someone accustomed to commanding attention, yet her fingers betrayed her, fidgeting with a silver locket at her throat. "How kind of you to invite me, Miss Marple," Lydia said, her voice crisp but wary as she settled into a chintz armchair. "I don't often socialize. My work keeps me occupied." Miss Marple poured tea, her movements deliberate. "Oh, I quite understand. St. Mary Mead can feel like a world away from the bustle of London or Cairo. You've traveled, I hear, like your sister, Clara." Lydia's lips tightened. Clara's travels were more theatrical. Mine were for research. I'm an archivist, specializing in antiquities. Our father was a collector, you see. He left us both a taste for old things." "How fascinating," Miss Marple said, offering the shortbread. "I suppose you and Clara share a love for treasures like that statue of hers. Egyptian, isn't it? The village is all abuzz about it." Lydia's hand froze mid-reach, the locket clicking softly as she released it. "You've heard about that, have you? It's nothing special, just a trinket Clara's made into some grand mystery. She's always been one for drama." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Village gossip does exaggerate, but I heard it's quite valuable. A family heirloom, perhaps." Lydia's gaze sharpened, but she sipped her tea, composing herself. "It was our father's, yes. He found it on a dig in Luxor years ago. Clara took it when he died, claimed it was her share of the estate. I didn't fight her for it then, but—" She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "It's complicated." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind cataloging every word. Lydia's bitterness suggested more than a sibling spat, perhaps a clue to the statue's true significance. She steered the conversation to lighter topics, chatting about the village fete and the vicar's new hymnals, but her eyes never strayed far from Lydia's locket, which swung like a pendulum with her restless movements. The telephone's sharp ring broke the moment, and Miss Marple excused herself to answer it. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, low and urgent. "Is Lydia Vane there? Tell her to stay away from the idol. She's meddling in things she doesn't understand." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. "May I ask who's calling?" The line went dead. She returned to the parlor, where Lydia sat rigid, her teacup untouched. "Miss Vane," Miss Marple ventured, "forgive my curiosity, but you mentioned the statue was your father's. Is it valuable enough to attract unwanted attention? The village has had some odd goings-on lately." Lydia's eyes flicked to the window, as if expecting to see someone lurking in the garden. "It's not about money," she said quietly. "Father believed it held a map, a guide to something hidden in Egypt, a tomb perhaps, or a cache of artifacts. Clara thinks it's hers to guard, but she's wrong. It's dangerous, and she's too stubborn to see it." A map. Miss Marple's mind flashed to the symbol from Tommy's note and Grimsby's shop. Could the statue's eyes, those watchers from the Anubis cult, conceal a map to a lost treasure? She pressed gently. Dangerous. Surely not in St. Mary Mead. Lydia's laugh was hollow. "You'd be surprised what follows relics like that. People will do anything, lie, steal, worse, to claim them." The conversation was cut short by Lydia's abrupt departure, claiming a prior engagement. Miss Marple watched her go, her silhouette sharp against the fading light. The warning call lingered in her thoughts, its anonymity a puzzle in itself.
Who knew Lydia was here, and why warn her now? Determined to follow this new lead, Miss Marple donned her coat and headed to the village green where the evening was settling into a cool hush. Her destination was the post office, where Mrs. Weatherby might know who had access to the village's only public telephone. But as she passed the churchyard, a flicker of movement caught her eye. A figure in a dark coat slipping behind the yew tree near Haverford Manor's gate. She paused, her breath catching. The figure bent low, dropping something small that glinted in the moonlight before vanishing into the shadows. Miss Marple approached cautiously, her eyes scanning the ground. There, nestled in the grass, was a matchbox, its surface worn but intact. She picked it up, noting a faint acrid smell, not tobacco, but something sharper, chemical. Inside was a single match, its tip stained with a greenish residue. Poison, perhaps, like the shard from the fate. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind racing. The yew tree again. Tommy's note had mentioned it, and now this poisoned match. Back at her cottage, Miss Marple examined the matchbox under her magnifying glass. The residue was unfamiliar, but its presence near the manor suggested a connection to the bloodied foxgloves and the glass shard. She recalled Dr. Haydock's expertise with toxicology and resolved to consult him tomorrow. For now, she turned her attention to Lydia's words. A map to a tomb, guarded by a statue. The Anubis cult's relics were said to be protected by curses or traps. Had Tommy stumbled into such a trap? She sat by her fire, sketching the symbol from memory. The circle, the jagged line. It was a warning, a marker, a key. Lydia's fear, Grimsby's unease, and the mysterious collar all pointed to the statue's hidden power. But who was orchestrating this dance of secrets, and what had they done to Tommy? As the clock struck 9, Miss Marple arose, her resolve firm. The manor's greenhouse, with its exotic plants, might hold answers. Clara's nervous glances, Elsie's tales of night visitors, and now this poisoned match, suggested a danger rooted in the earth itself. Tomorrow she would visit Clara again, perhaps with a cutting from her own garden as an excuse. The greenhouse, she suspected, was more than a haven for flowers, it was a piece of the puzzle. The chapter closed with Miss Marple standing at her window, the village silent under a starlit sky. The idle secret was buried deep, but she was closing in, one careful step at a time. Lydia's revelations had lit a path, and Miss Marple would follow it, undeterred by warnings or shadows.
Chapter 5. The Greenhouse Conspiracy. The morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge, tinged with the scent of dew-soaked grass, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Haverford Manor. Her basket held a small potted geranium, a gift to justify her visit, but her true purpose was to explore the greenhouse where Clara Vane cultivated her exotic plants. The matchbox with its poisoned tip, found near the yew tree, had confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions. The manor's secrets were not confined to its locked room. The greenhouse, with its rare flora, might hold the key to the oily residue on the glass shard and the fate of Tommy Pierce. The manor's gates stood ajar, and Miss Marple noted fresh footprints in the damp earth, too large for Clara or Elsie, suggesting a recent visitor. She knocked, and Elsie answered, her apron dusted with flour and her eyes darting nervously. "Miss Marple, you're up early. Miss Vane's in the greenhouse tending her plants. She's been there since dawn." "Perfect," Miss Marple said, her smile disarming. "I brought a geranium for her collection. My aunt always said a new plant brightens any house. May I join her?" Elsie hesitated, then nodded, leading Miss Marple through the manor's shadowed halls to the greenhouse, a glass structure glinting in the morning light. Inside, the air was humid,
thick with the scent of loam and strange, waxy flowers. Clara stood at a workbench, pruning a spiky plant with leaves like daggers. Her silk blouse was rolled to the elbows, and her face, though composed, betrayed a flicker of strain. "Miss Marple," Clara said, setting down her shears, "another visit. You're spoiling me with these gifts." "Oh, it's nothing," Miss Marple replied, placing the geranium on a shelf. "I thought this might suit your greenhouse. Such unusual plants you have. Wherever did you find them?" Clara's smile was tight. "Travels, mostly. This one's from South America, quite rare. I've a passion for things that don't belong here." Miss Marple's eyes roamed the greenhouse, noting rows of vibrant blooms and a cluster of small, leathery plants with a faint, bitter smell. One matched the description Dr. Haydock had given her yesterday when she'd shown him the matchbox residue. Nerium oleander, a plant whose sap could be distilled into a deadly poison. She stepped closer, feigning admiration. "These are lovely. Do they need much care?" Clara's hand twitched toward the plant. "They're delicate. Too much handling can be risky." Before Miss Marple could probe further, a heated voice echoed from the far end of the greenhouse. "Clara, we need to talk, now." A young man emerged from behind a trellis, his face flushed with anger. He was tall, with tousled dark hair and a jawline that recalled the matinee idols of Clara's era. Miss Marple recognized him from village gossip. Victor Vey, Clara's former co-star, now fallen on hard times. Clara's face paled. "Victor, not here, please." Miss Marple seized the moment, her voice bright. "Oh, Mr. Vey, I saw you in Moonlit Masquerade years ago. Such a performance. Are you visiting Miss Vane?" Victor's eyes flicked to her, wary but softened by flattery. "Just catching up. Old friends, you know." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her gaze lingering on his clenched fists. "St. Mary Mead is a fine place for reunions, though I hear the manor statue is causing quite a stir. Have you seen it?" Victor's jaw tightened, and Clara shot him a warning glance. "It's nothing," he said curtly. "Just a prop Clara's obsessed with." Miss Marple nodded, but her mind catalogued their tension. Before she could press further, a loud crash rang out. A clay pot shattered on the stone floor, revealing a hidden compartment in the workbench. Papers spilled out, yellowed and brittle, alongside a small, carved box etched with the Anubis symbol, a circle split by a jagged line. Clara gasped, rushing to gather the papers, but Miss Marple glimpsed a letter addressed to C. Vane in a spidery hand. "Clumsy of me," Miss Marple said, bending to help, her fingers brushing the box. It was heavier than it looked, hinting at something hidden inside. "These old papers must be precious." Clara snatched them away, her voice sharp. "Just family records, nothing important." But Miss Marple had seen enough. The letter mentioned the idol's key and a shipment to Alexandria. A smuggling ring, perhaps. She excused herself, citing a need to water her own plants, but lingered outside the greenhouse, peering through a fogged pane. Victor was gesturing wildly, his voice low but intense. "You can't keep it hidden forever, Clara. They'll come for it, and for us." Clara's reply was inaudible, but her posture, hunched, defensive, spoke volumes. Victor stormed out, brushing past Miss Marple without a glance, and disappeared down the manor's drive. She waited until Clara returned inside, then slipped back to the greenhouse, her heart pounding. The compartment was now closed, but she pried it open with a hairpin, revealing a single item overlooked in the chaos. A torn photograph, showing Victor and Tommy Pierce, his arm around Victor's shoulder, both smiling against a backdrop of palm trees. The photo's edge was singed, as if someone had tried to destroy evidence of that connection. Miss Marple pocketed the photograph, her mind racing. Victor and Tommy, friends in some far-off place, perhaps Egypt. The smuggling reference suggested a darker connection. The singed edge of the photograph was a clue in itself. Someone had tried to destroy evidence of that connection. She left the manor, her geranium left behind as a forgotten prop, and headed to Dr. Haydock's surgery with the matchbox residue. His analysis confirmed her fears. The greenish residue was indeed oleander, a potent toxin that could cause heart failure in small doses. This linked the matchbox to the poisoned flowers at the fete, suggesting someone at the manor was wielding a dangerous weapon. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, the photograph and the confirmed poison weighing heavily on her mind. The papers in the greenhouse hinted at a smuggling operation tied to Clara's statue, and Victor's presence in the photo with Tommy suggested he knew more than he'd let on. His angry argument with Clara, demanding the idol's secret, pointed to a shared history, perhaps one that had led to Tommy's disappearance. The singed edge of the photograph was a clue in itself. Someone had tried to destroy evidence of that connection. As she sat by her fire that evening, Miss Marple spread out her clues. The cigarette case, the glass shard, the matchbox, and now the photograph. The idol symbol tied them all to Clara's statue, and the smuggling papers suggested a criminal network reaching far beyond St. Mary Mead. Victor's angry words in the greenhouse echoed in her thoughts. They'll come for it. Who were they? And what was the idol's secret worth killing for? She resolved to track down Victor. His cottage, on the outskirts of the village, would be her next stop. If he and Tommy were linked to the statue's mystery, his fear might loosen his tongue. Tomorrow she would pay him a visit, armed with her gentle persistence and a plate of fresh-baked scones. The greenhouse had yielded a piece of the puzzle, and Miss Marple was determined to find the next. The chapter closed with Miss Marple sipping her tea, the photograph on her table casting long shadows in the fireplace. The idol's deadly secret was closer to the surface, its edges sharp with danger. But Miss Marple had faced danger before, and she would not rest until Tommy's fate and the truth was uncovered.
Chapter 6. The Actor's Alibi. The late afternoon sun hung low over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of amber as Miss Jane Marple walked the winding lane to Victor Vey's cottage. Her basket held a tin of freshly baked scones, their buttery aroma a pretext for her visit, but her true purpose was to probe the actor's connection to Tommy Pierce and the mysterious statue at Haverford Manor. The torn photograph from the greenhouse showing Victor and Tommy together had deepened the puzzle, and Victor's heated words to Clara, "They'll come for it," hinted at a secret worth hiding. Miss Marple's steps were measured, but her mind was alight with anticipation. Victor's cottage was a ramshackle affair, its thatched roof sagging and its garden overrun with weeds. A rusty motorbike leaned against the wall, its tires caked with mud that matched the tracks she'd seen at the manor. She knocked, her knuckles rapping sharply on the peeling door. After a long pause, Victor appeared. His shirt rumbled and his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He blinked at her, clearly startled. "Miss Marple?" he said, his voice rough. "What brings you here?" She smiled, lifting the tin. "Just a neighborly gesture, Mr. Vey. I heard you were staying in the village, and my scones have been known to lift spirits. May I come in?" Victor hesitated, then stepped aside, gesturing to a cluttered parlor. The room smelled of stale tobacco and linseed oil, with faded posters of his films tacked to the walls. A battered suitcase lay open in the corner, spilling clothes and a glint of metal. An amulet, etched with the now familiar Anubis symbol, a circle split by a jagged line. Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene, setting the scones on a rickety table. "You're too kind," Victor said, slumping into a chair. "It's been a rough week. Old ghosts, you know." "Oh, I do," Miss Marple replied, settling opposite him. "The past has a way of lingering. I heard you and Tommy Pierce were friends. Such a shame about his disappearance. The village is quite worried." Victor's fingers twitched, reaching for a cigarette that wasn't there. "Tommy? Yeah, we knew each other. Met in Cairo years ago when I was filming Sands of Fate with Clara. He was a local guide, knew the ruins like the back of his hand. Good kid, but restless." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but probing. "He must have been thrilled to see you here. Did he ever mention Clara's statue? The village says it's quite the curiosity." Victor's gaze flicked to the amulet in the suitcase, then back to her. "That old thing? Just a prop, far as I know. Clara's always been dramatic about her souvenirs. Tommy thought it was creepy, said he saw her talking to it once like it was alive." "Talking to it?" Miss Marple's voice was all surprise, though her mind filed the detail away. "How peculiar! And now he's gone. Did he seem troubled before he vanished?" Victor rubbed his neck, his unease palpable. "He was jumpy, yeah. Kept saying he'd seen something at the manor, something about Grimsby, that dealer. Tommy caught him poking around the grounds one night wearing that amulet, thought it was some kind of ritual. I told him to let it go, but he wouldn't listen." Miss Marple's thoughts raced. Grimsby, again tied to the symbol and the statue. She leaned forward, her tone gentle. "A ritual? My! That sounds like one of those novels my nephew reads. Did Tommy say anything else?" Victor shook his head, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of fear. "Just that he was meeting someone by the yew tree. Midnight, he said. I figured he was chasing ghosts. Then he was gone." The yew tree. Tommy's note had mentioned it, and now Victor's story confirmed it as a focal point. Miss Marple was about to press further when a distant shout interrupted her. Through the window she saw smoke rising from the direction of Haverford Manor, a thin, acrid plume curling into the twilight sky. Victor leapt to his feet, his face pale. "That's the manor!" he exclaimed, grabbing his jacket. Miss Marple followed, her heart pounding, as they hurried toward the manor. The smoke was coming from the gatehouse, a small stone building near the entrance. A crowd had gathered, villagers, Elsie, and Mr. Clements, the groundskeeper, all staring as flames licked the gatehouse's roof. Constable Barnes was there, barking orders to fetch buckets. "What happened?" Miss Marple asked, catching Elsie's arm. Elsie's eyes were wide with panic. "I don't know. I was in the kitchen when I smelled smoke. The gatehouse just went up. Nobody's been in there for weeks." Miss Marple's gaze swept the scene, landing on a figure slipping away from the crowd. Lydia Vane, her navy coat unmistakable, her face drawn and pale. She moved with purpose, disappearing into the manor's gardens. Miss Marple's suspicions flared. Lydia, so close to the fire's origin and so quick to flee. As the villagers doused the flames, Miss Marple edged toward the gatehouse, her eyes scanning the charred debris. Amid the ashes she spotted a singed scrap of paper, its edges curled but legible. She plucked it free, her fingers careful to avoid the heat. It was a diary page, written in a hurried hand. The idol's gaze must be opened at the full moon. The key lies within. Below was a sketch of the Anubis symbol, its jagged line stark against the scorched paper. Miss Marple's heart tucked the page into her sleeve, her eyes sharp behind her spectacles. The fire had been a desperate act, but it had revealed a crucial clue. Tomorrow, under the full moon, the idol's secret would come to light, and Miss Marple would be there to see it.
Chapter 7. Moonlit Motives. The full moon hung low over St. Mary Mead, its silver light casting long shadows across the village as Miss Jane Marple stood by her cottage window, her shawl draped over her shoulders. The singed diary page, with its cryptic mention of a ritual in the idol's key, had set her mind ablaze.
The fire at Haverford Manor's gatehouse, Lydia's furtive departure, and Victor's evasive answers all pointed to a gathering storm centered on Clara Vane's mysterious statue. Tonight, under the moon's watchful gaze, Miss Marple was determined to witness whatever secrets unfolded at the manor. She had rallied a small group of villagers, Mrs. Bantry, Mr. Clements, and the ever-reliable Constable Barnes, for a discreet watch on the manor's grounds under the pretense of ensuring no further fires broke out. She tucked the diary page into her pocket, alongside Tommy Pierce's cigarette case and the poisoned matchbox, and slipped out into the night. The air was cool, scented with late-blooming roses, and the village lay quiet, save for the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Marple moved with purpose, her sensible shoes silent on the dew-damp grass, and joined her companions near the churchyard, where they could observe the manor's gates unseen. Mrs. Bantry clutched a thermos of tea, her eyes bright with excitement. "Jane, this feels like one of your nephew's thrillers. Do you really think something's afoot?" Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Oh, I'm sure it's just a precaution, Dolly. But old houses have their secrets, and it's best to keep an eye out." Mr. Clements, gripping a flashlight, grumbled, "If that Vane woman's up to no good, I want to know. My foxgloves are still a wreck." Constable Barnes, his uniform crisp despite the hour, nodded. "We'll stay out of sight, Miss Marple. Just say the word if you spot trouble." They settled behind a hedgerow, the manor's silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the grounds, lingering at the yew tree where Tommy's note had promised a midnight meeting. The diary's mention of a full-moon ritual suggested tonight was no coincidence. She recalled the Anubis cult's lore from her library research. Relics like Clara's statue often required a specific alignment, moonlight perhaps, to reveal their secrets. A key, a map, a curse. She was close to unraveling it. As the village clock struck 11, a faint light flickered in the manor's upper windows, then went dark. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. She whispered to her companions, "Stay here, but be ready. I'm going to take a closer look." Mrs. Bantry gasped softly, "Jane, be careful." Miss Marple crept forward, her small frame blending into the shadows. She skirted the manor's wall, pausing near the greenhouse, where the air carried the bitter tang of oleander. The locked room, where Clara kept the statue, was her target. She found a side door ajar, its hinges creaking faintly as she slipped inside. The manor's halls were silent, but a soft glow spilled from the locked room's keyhole, now unlocked, its door slightly open. She peered inside, her breath catching. The room was small, its walls draped in faded velvet, and at its center stood the statue, a gold and obsidian figure of Anubis, its jackal eyes glinting in the candlelight. Clara stood before it, her silk robe shimmering, her hands clasped as if in prayer. Victor Vane was there too, his face tense, and Lydia Vane, her navy coat discarded, knelt by an altar of sorts, a stone table strewn with papers, and a small carved box etched with the Anubis symbol. "You can't do this, Clara," Victor hissed, his voice low but urgent. "It's not just a map, it's dangerous. Tommy found out, and look what happened." Lydia's voice was sharp. "Don't play innocent, Victor. You were in on it from the start. That statue's ours, Father's legacy. We open it tonight, or we lose everything." Clara's eyes were feverish, fixed on the statue. "It's more than a map, it's power. The cult knew Anubis guards the gem, and the gem guards the tomb." Miss Marple's mind raced. The gem! The diary had mentioned a key, and Lydia's words at tea had hinted at a tomb. The carved box on the altar, could it hold the gem, the key to the statue's secret? She edged closer, her foot brushing a loose floorboard. The creak echoed like a gunshot, and 3 heads snapped toward her. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Who's there?" Before Miss Marple could retreat, a new figure burst through the door. Mr. Grimsby, his face twisted with fury, a knife gleaming in his hand. "You fools! You thought you could cut me out! The gem is mine!" Chaos erupted. Victor lunged at Grimsby, knocking over a candelabrum. Flames licked the velvet curtains, and Lydia screamed, grabbing the carved box. Miss Marple, ever quick-witted, seized her chance. She darted forward, snatching a heavy candlestick from the altar and swinging it at a nearby gong. Its clang reverberated through the manor. "Enough!" Miss Marple's voice, though small, cut through the din. "This has gone far enough. Put the box down, Miss Vane." Lydia froze, clutching the box, her eyes wild. Victor backed away, hands raised, while Clara sank to her knees, the statue looming over her. Mr. Grimsby, once again in despair, lunged for the knife, but Miss Marple stepped on it, her expression stern. "I suggest you wait for Constable Barnes, Mr. Grimsby." The mention of the constable stilled the room. Lydia set the box down, her shoulders slumping, and Grimsby's face twisted in defeat. Miss Marple picked up the box, its weight confirming her suspicions. Something heavy lay inside, perhaps the gem itself. She tucked it into her basket, her heart pounding, but her demeanor calm. "Clara, Lydia, Victor," she said, her voice steady. "This statue has caused enough trouble. Let's have no more nonsense tonight." As if on cue, Constable Barnes burst in, followed by Mrs. Bantry and Mr. Clements, their faces a mix of shock and awe. "Miss Marple!" Barnes exclaimed. "What's going on?" "A misunderstanding, I think, but one we'll sort out. Take Mr. Grimsby to the station, and I'll explain everything tomorrow." The group scattered, Grimsby and cuffs, Lydia and Victor escorted out, and Clara left trembling by the statue. Miss Marple lingered, her gaze on the carved box in her basket. She had the key, or close to it. The gem, if it was inside, held the secret to the idol's power, and she was determined to uncover it before anyone else could. The chapter closed with Miss Marple stepping into the moonlit garden, the manor's windows dark behind her. The night's chaos had revealed the players, Clara, Lydia, Victor, Grimsby, all bound by greed or fear. But the gem was in her hands now, and with it the truth was within reach. Tomorrow she would call on Inspector Craddock to lay the puzzle bare, but for now she walked home, the carved box a quiet weight in her basket, the moon lighting her way.
Chapter 8. The Idol's Truth. The morning light streamed through the high windows of St. Mary Mead's village hall, casting a soft glow on the polished wooden floor where Miss Jane Marple stood, her shawl neatly draped over her shoulders. Her basket, now empty of the carved box she'd secured last night, rested at her feet. The chaotic scene at Haverford Manor under the full moon, Grimsby's knife, Clara's desperation, Lydia's fear, and Victor's defiance had brought the mystery of the idol to a head. Now, with Inspector Craddock's help, Miss Marple had gathered the key players, Clara Vane, Lydia Vane, Victor Vane, and Arthur Grimsby in the hall to unravel the tangled threads of greed, fear, and murder that revolved around the Anubis statue. Inspector Craddock, his notebook open, surveyed the group with a stern eye. Clara sat rigid, her auburn hair pinned tightly, her hands clasped in her lap. Lydia, beside her, stared at the floor, her locket glinting faintly. Victor slouched in his chair, his matinee idol charm dimmed by exhaustion, while Grimsby, handcuffed and flanked by Constable Barnes, glared defiantly. The villagers, including Mrs. Bantry and Mr. Clements, filled the back rows, their whispers hushed as Miss Marple stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her eyes sweeping the room. "St. Mary Mead is a quiet place, but even quiet places have their shadows. The disappearance of Tommy Pierce, the fire at the manor, and the strange goings-on around Miss Vane's statue have troubled us all.
but I believe we can lay this matter to rest today." Clara's head snapped up, her eyes wide. "Miss Marple, surely this is a police matter now." "Oh, it is," Miss Marple agreed, her tone mild. "But sometimes a village spinster sees things others miss. Let's start with Tommy Pierce, a good lad, vanished after working at the manor. I found his cigarette case by the yew tree, along with a note. The idol sees all. Midnight, under the yew." She produced the note, its jagged Anubis symbol stark against the worn paper. The room stirred and Grimsby shifted uncomfortably. Miss Marple continued, "That note led me to the statue, an Egyptian relic said to guard a gem that unlocks a hidden tomb. But the gem, I found, was a fake." Lydia gasped, her hand flying to her locket. "A fake? That's impossible!" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Not impossible, Miss Vane. I opened the carved box last night, after our excitement at the manor. The gem inside was glass, painted to look like an emerald. Clara, you knew this, didn't you?" Clara's face paled, but she said nothing. Miss Marple pressed on. "You planted the fake to lure out the real culprit. You suspected someone was after the statue's secret, a map to a pharaoh's tomb, as your sister Lydia believed. But you didn't trust anyone, not even your own family." Victor leaned forward, his voice hoarse. "Clara, you said the gem was real. You told me it was worth a fortune." Clara's eyes flashed. "I had to, Victor. You were too deep in with Grimsby. I needed to know who was behind it all." Miss Marple nodded, pulling the singed diary page from her pocket. "This diary, found in the gatehouse fire, mentions a ritual to open the idol's gaze. But it also mentions a smuggling ring tied to artifacts shipped to Alexandria. Clara, you inherited your father's collection, but also his debts to dangerous people. Tommy Pierce, your friend from Cairo, stumbled onto this. He saw Grimsby at the manor wearing an Anubis amulet and suspected a plot." Grimsby snarled, straining against his cuffs. "You've got no proof, old woman." "Oh, but I do," Miss Marple said, producing the glass shard and the matchbox. "The shard from the fate, smeared with oleander sap, matches the poison on this matchbox, found by the yew tree. Dr. Haydock confirmed it. A toxin from Clara's greenhouse. Tommy was poisoned, wasn't he, Mr. Grimsby? He knew too much about your smuggling operation, so you silenced him." The room erupted in gasps. Mrs. Bantry clutched her pearls, and Inspector Craddock's pen paused. Grimsby's defiance crumbled, his shoulders slumping. He was nosy, kept asking about the statue, the shipments. "I didn't mean to kill him, just scare him. The poison was supposed to knock him out." Miss Marple's voice softened, but her gaze was steel. "You gave him too much. I found his body, Inspector, hidden in the manor's old well this morning, covered with boards. Poor Tommy." Clara sobbed, covering her face, while Lydia stared, stunned. Victor shook his head, muttering, "I told him to stay out of it." Miss Marple turned to Lydia. "You, Miss Vane, wanted the statue for its map, believing it was your birthright. You argued with Grimsby, hoping to claim the tomb's riches. Victor, you were caught between loyalty to Clara and greed for the prize. But Clara, you set this trap, didn't you? You spread rumors of a curse, knowing it would draw Grimsby out." Clara nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I had to protect the statue. Father warned me. Its secret was too dangerous. I thought a fate gem would flush out the truth." Inspector Craddock closed his notebook. "That's enough for me. Grimsby, you're under arrest for murder and smuggling. Miss Vane, Mr. Vey, we'll need statements. Miss Marple, you've outdone yourself."
The hall buzzed as Grimsby was led away, and Clara and Lydia embraced, their feud softened by the truth. Victor followed, head bowed, promising to cooperate. Miss Marple gathered her basket, her work done. The statue's secret, a map to a tomb, would remain with Clara, its danger neutralized now that Grimsby's ring was broken. Tommy's death was avenged, and St. Mary Mead could sleep soundly again. As she walked home, the afternoon sun warmed her face. The village was quiet once more, its shadows dispelled. She paused at her garden gate, her eyes lingering on the manor's distant silhouette. The idol's deadly secret was no more, and Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. She entered her cottage, her knitting waiting by the fire, ready to resume its gentle rhythm. The chapter closed with Miss Marple settling into her armchair, her needles clicking softly. The puzzle was solved, the threads neatly tied. There would be no more midnight rituals, no more poisoned matches. St. Mary Mead was safe, and Miss Marple, as always, had found the truth in its whispers.